This is Sir Bradley Wiggins' Cafe Aficionado, the podcast that ducks into the slipstream of cycling's elite. I'm Bradley Wiggins, and every week I'll be rolling through cycling's rich history, the stories and its great races, with the riders and the people who make the seemingly impossible possible. This is your weekly destination for the tales, laughs and chat you get at every cycling cafe on the planet, finishing as all good rides do with a coffee and a cake. Coming up in this episode.
I was only really young, but I can't remember the day, but I know this from being told in the family. My grandparents learnt off the 6 o'clock news.
Jeez.
They were sat, they'd both retired, they were sat watching television, and a big news for lead item, picture of Tom Simpson comes on. They knew this was a big stage, they knew cycling, they thought he'd won the stage. And they said he died.
Today's guest is cycling writer, photographer, broadcaster, and most importantly for this episode, the nephew of the late great Tom Simpson, Chris Sidwells. First, to my ever-loyal co-host and domestique, cycling journalist and fellow obsessive, Graham Wilgoss. Graham, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, Brad. Yeah. Ever loyal, I like. Obsessive, also probably quite accurate. Which leads us to, actually, the fact that this series is focused on the greatest race in the world, the Tour de France. Every stage, as we know, is a story. Each summit is a reckoning, not just for the riders, but for the fans who are dragged along too. And we want to take our listeners along with us, don't we?
We do. And if you're enjoying it, hit the follow button and make sure you never miss an episode. You can also watch us on YouTube and follow us on our socials at Sir Brad's Cafe. All of that info is on the show notes.
It is on the show notes, along with, and Chris, I feel like you've been sitting here a little while now, so it's about time that we brought you in, because you've got a very particular link to the climb that we want to talk about today, Mont Ventoux, the beast of Provence, because you are, of course, the nephew of Tom Simpson.
Yeah, I mean, it's a place I see with mixed feelings. It's a beautiful place. I know we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But yeah, I'm Tom's nephew. I was too young when he died to have known him very well, but I must say that through 25 years of being a cycling journalist, I've followed his career and written books about him and found out such a lot about him.
So Brad, a bit of history on Mont Ventoux first, the beast of Provence in the south of France. We should place ourselves. It stands alone, visible from the Alps, visible on a good day from the Pyrenees, and from 35,000 feet. Pilots flying south to the Côte d'Azur and Italy use it as a reference point, or at least they used to before modern technology. It's a real bucket list climb for cycling fans. More than 100,000 riders, amateur riders, tackle it every single year. And that's partly because it's featured in the Tour 18 times to date, soon to be 19 by the end of this coming 2025 edition. It is a brutal old climb, you know more than most. It can be approached from 3 directions, the hardest of which begins in Bed 1, where there is little to shield you from the swirling winds that give Ventoux its name. Ventoux literally means, Brad? Windy, and it is a windy old ride up that 21 kilometres, which ascends 1,594 metres to 1,000, or just shy of 2,000 metres above sea level. 10% is the average gradient towards the summit. It's been used as a summit finish 10 times before at the Tour de France, including, as we've alluded to, the only time that you rode it in 2009. That was a historic day that we will get into. Suffice to say, it's a mythical climb, brutal, and a tragic one on one occasion, which is why we've got the main man, Chris Sidwells, here with us.
Well, there was no one else that we could have on to talk about this episode. My hero, Tommy Simpson, his nephew, Chris. Chris, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Can you explain to us, in your words, from the family's point of view, what happened that day? So much has been written about Tom and his death, but of course, let's hear it from someone who knows more than most.
Yeah. I have to go back in time. He's been set it in context. So to try to put you in the mind, because there's some controversial facts and some disputed facts about Tom's death, but I feel I've got to put you in Tom's mind for that day, where he was in his life. This was a kid, 16 years old, who won a bike race. 3 years later, he's won an Olympic bronze medal. 3 years after that, he's won the Tour of Flanders at age of 23. You know what that is. When you tell Flemish cyclists...
Still the only British winner.
Still the only British winner. When you tell Flemish cyclists that this Brit, won his first attempt, won the Tour of Flanders at 23, they go, no, what? It's not possible. And yeah, he did. He won Milan San Remo. He won Il Lombardia. He was our first world road race champion. Only Mark Cavendish has won that title since. Sir Mark Cavendish. Only Sir Mark Cavendish has won one monument. Tom won 3 in this short career that was 7.5 years. And he won the Sports Personality of the Year. You've won that.
Yeah.
You know what a big deal that was.
In an era when Bobby Moore was winning it and people like that.
And Henry Cooper and people like that. Household name. Tom Simpson was a household name when no cycling hardly was reported, but a lot about Tom Simpson. So he was that big a star. And I think he felt a lot of pressure on himself. This was a kid who was a coal miner's son who started with nothing, was driving around in Aston Martins. He got a Jaguar, he got investments, and he was an intelligent guy. He built things for his future, and he built things for his future. And you've got to think about that, and you setting the scene for Mont Ventoux in 1967. 1966, because of a silly accident he had, it was his own fault, skiing. How was a kid from Arworth, from a coal mining village, going to ski? You know, don't go downhill skiing, Tom. Off he went downhill skiing. He broke his leg and he lost a lot of money that year, and he was got investments and he was building a future, and he was saying to people, he said to my mum, they were the next in age group. Yeah. He said in the winter of that year, I want to get out of cycling.
So, I remember you telling me that once before. And he wanted to do just 6-day racing.
He wants to be a 6-day racer, and he says, I just don't like some of the things we have to do. I'll tell you after I've stopped.
Right.
But I'm not backing down because I want to create a future for Helen, Jane and Joanne's kids where we don't have to work. You know, I've seen how these top riders live, and that's what I want for them. Yeah. The next big thing for him was the Tour of France. Yeah. He'd got a British team behind him in 1967. In the past, Peugeot BP, they didn't always ride for him. No. He said himself, he had to impose himself on the team in every Tour of France. And Barry Hoban, the late Barry Hoban, has explained that the Peugeot riders never rode for him. They'd be protecting their own 14th place. The Tour of France was the next big thing. He had to win it. Britain had just won the World Cup. England had just won the World Cup. He could be back in the limelight again if he could do that. He turned his back on the single-day races, won Paris-Nice, won 2 stages in the Vuelta. He was ready for the Tour of France. Got this British team that was weak behind him, but it was his chance. He was the leader. He moved up to 7th place overall. He moved up to 6th place overall on the Ballon d'Alsace stage. And then he fell ill. And it was slipping away from him. And he lost some time. He dropped down to 7th. And people in the team, he'd got gastric flu. He wasn't eating properly. Felice Gimondi told me that it was on a drip at one time. The Italian team doctor was having to give him a rehydration drip every day. And other teammates were telling him to stop. You know, Vin Denson said to him, you stop, get out of the Tour, train for the World Championships. And he said, I can't. I've got debts to pay, I've got things to pay, I've got things to do.
Really, yeah.
And I've got to get this building done. I said, I'm feeling better. He was second in the bunch sprint for 7th place the night before he died at Mont Ventoux. And in the morning, he said, I can get over the Mont Ventoux. It's an easier day. The next day, then there's a rest day. And then maybe in the Pyrenees, I can go back up and get 3rd place overall. Then he would have got a load of criterium contracts and he would have been back where he was. So that was his mind state going in. He knew he was in a bad situation physically. It was extremely hot, and he never raced he did race intelligently, but that day he just tried too hard, and he was caught. Barry says he was caught in a complete storm.
Did he like the climb of Mont Ventoux?
No.
Had he raced it in the Dauphiné and things?
He'd raced it in the 1965 Tour of France, and he hated it.
Really?
And he did not like the heat.
No.
You know, he won races like Tour of Flanders. He won the World Championships when it was raining all day. You know, he was from the northeast of England and from County Durham. He was not used to the heat. He hated, Vin Denson told me, he hated those cigales. You know, those insects that whistle in the trees in Provence. He says, I hate those little bastards.
Vin told me once at Chalet Renard, when we rode up for the 50th anniversary, that Tom stopped in the cafe at the foot of the climb in Bedouin that day for some water or something. Is that true? Do you know if that was the case?
I don't know whether it's him who stopped. I know Colin Lewis was told to get some drinks for them. There is a story that he's supposed to have had a little bit of brandy, but Colin Lewis told me that he'd got a little tiny bottle of cognac in his pocket. And he says, what have you got? He said, I've only got this. He said, well, it might help settle my stomach. So I had a little bit of that.
What I always find fascinating, and try when you talk about the mindset of Tommy Simpson and the frame of mind he was in that day, was just how close to the summit he actually was, and how he must have suffered up that climb before then, to the point of death. I mean, it's hard to just put yourself in his frame of mind, and how I mean, it hurts anyway riding up Mont Ventoux, but how close to death he must have been way before he actually did die.
Yep. I mean,
I
can't.
What kind of mind, you talk about mental aptitude. That guy was.
I can't imagine how he felt.
It was 1 kilometre from the summit as well.
Yeah.
So you could see it.
He'd stumbled before that. He was struggling, and he kept attacking. He wouldn't see a lot. Jan Janssen in the group behind him when he'd gone with the front group. It got dropped from that, and he kept attacking him. And Jan Janssen said, "Just ride with us, Tom. Ride with us." He says, "We'll catch them. We'll catch them on the descent." And they did, and Jan Janssen won that stage. And Jan, when I've met everybody who knew him, Jan said. So I heard some of his happiest times of his life. He said, "I was just in tears when what happened."
It was a tragedy, wasn't it? On a massive scale within. That we showed how thought of Tom was by the rest of the peloton. I mean, I believe Eddie Merckx was the only rider to go to the funeral, wasn't he? Because he wasn't doing.
Because he wasn't doing the Tour of France. Because remember, Tom died in the middle week of the Tour of France. There was still another week of the Tour of France. Riders wanted to go. Felice Gimondi told me he wanted to go, but the Italian team wouldn't let him. Jacques Anquetil was working on the tour on the television, and he sent his wife. Janine went, but. Yeah, he died. The official, I've not seen the autopsy because they're destroyed after a certain amount of time. It said heart failure due to heat exhaustion and extreme dehydration. And we've got to address this fact that there was traces of amphetamines found in his body. And I'm quite happy to do that. I don't defend Tom for his decision, but I wasn't in his shoes. And I just ask anybody that judges him to put themselves in his shoes. This young man has got everything before him, and he's doing something that the other riders were doing. He knew that. He told Roger St. Pierre, a journalist that he really trusted, he says, "I don't like having to take drugs. I don't like having to take amphetamines." He says, "But if it means backing down and somebody who's not as good as me beating me, what can I do?" He even said to Roger, "I support the new dope test. I wish it was clean. I don't like it." But he was 29 years old. Nobody to guide him, and all these people, agents and people like that, saying it's all right, everybody does it, Tom.
Yeah, and then even on that, I mean, ultimately, a wife was widowed that day, and 2 young girls lost their father.
Yeah, absolutely, and the effects on them. I mean, my grandparents. This was the days. Remember, 1967, a coal mining village in North Nottinghamshire. Very few people had a phone. So Can
you remember the day you've heard the news?
I can remember the day I heard the news because from my first memory is my father worked down the mine, and because they had a phone there, the police were able to phone him, and he could come up. He was on the afternoon shift. It was him that told the family. But my grandparents, unbeknown to me, and I was only really young, but I can't remember the day. But I know this from being told in the family. My grandparents learnt off the 6 o'clock news.
Jeez.
They were sat. They'd both retired. They were sat watching television, and a big news for lead item, picture of Tom Simpson comes on. They knew this was a big stage. They knew cycling. They thought he'd won the stage. And they said he died.
And the famous last words of Tom, wasn't it? Put me back on my bike.
Yeah, which...
Did he say it, or didn't he?
He didn't.
And that was Harry Hall?
It was made by Sidney Saltmarsh, but it was Harry Hall who told me what he actually said.
Right.
Harry, he said he'd stumbled before, and he was undoing his straps, his toe straps, toe clips and straps. And he said, no, Harry, do my straps up. I've got to go on.
Yeah.
He said, it's over for you. He said, no, I've got to go on. And those are the last things he said.
Talking about, just very briefly, the English team for Tom and the Italian team mentioned there, this was back in the day where you would have raced for your country's team, as opposed your country would enter a team into the Tour, as opposed to having, like with Brad, a commercial team like Team Sky.
It was just a brief interlude. Up until 1960, I think it was 62, there had been, from 1930 to 1962, there'd been national teams, and there was then professional teams, and then in 1967 and 68 they tried national teams again.
Yeah.
But Brad, you share an affinity with Tom for lots of reasons. He was the first British rider to wear the yellow jersey. Obviously, you were the first British rider to win the yellow jersey. But the way that you both got into racing, Chris, I think there's something in this too. You kind of did it the hard way. You know, you packed your car full of your most needed belongings, and you just made your own way in the hope of it working out for you.
I mean, I was always aware of Tom growing up. When I was getting into cycling in my teens, you know, the story was sort of ever present in magazines and books and things. And my mum told me my dad knew the family because Gary knew Albert, who was very close with Tom, and the daughters Joanne.
Joanne was living in the same block of flats as you and your
and
family.
so I was always aware of Tom, and obviously then it was steeped in sort of the history and the romantic pictures and things like that of Tom, and the personality he displayed as well was, you know, that Brit in Belgium with a bowler hat. And things like that were appealed to me for some reason. And I think Tom's personality came across in photographs. It was never a photo where he wasn't smiling. And then of course, I started racing at Herne Hill Velodrome. And there's great shots of Tom turning up in a suit to the Good Friday meeting as world champion. Yeah. And, you know, I wouldn't be sat here today had Tom not gone before. You know, and Tom and Barry paved the way for all of us.
He was incredibly commercially savvy, wasn't he? He understood that.
I hate to imagine what he would have been like in this era with social media and things like that.
Gosh,
He'd have been,
yeah.
I think it's hard. You know, we talk about Elvis and the Beatles and things before social media and just the word of mouth and how did you describe Tom there? How big he was in the 60s. Around a time when we won a World Cup in football.
The original cycling influencer, maybe.
And I remember Britain, London was leading in the fashion world. In pop music, there were the Beatles. They had him on. They had him do guest disc jockey things in Parisian radio shows. You know, where he'd introduce the Beatles and things like that. And he played this English gentleman as well.
He did.
There was a series of books that were very popular in France called the Adventures of Major Thompson, and it was him that dressed in that bowler hat and the suits. And he was supposed to be a retired stockbroker that lived in Paris that walked around with an umbrella. And it was L'Equipe journalists that knew how popular that was and thought, Tom Simpson, Major Thompson, right, that's his. And they dressed him up after he won the Tour of Flanders. But he kept that. He kept that bowler hat.
What do you think he would have made of where cycling is today, particularly on the British scene?
He'd have loved it. And he's one of his ambitions, he's always said, was to have he says, there's no reason British riders are just as strong as the Continentals. It's just that they're reluctant to come over here and live the life. He says, and my dream would be to get a British sponsor, British riders, and me be the manager of it. Yeah. And that was the long-term plan. The TI Rally team was thought about. They were thinking about that in the 60s. And David Duffield, who started that, has said that if Tom hadn't have died, it wouldn't have been Peter Post the manager. It would have been Tom. And imagine then what he would have done with Pippa York, Malcolm Elliott, you know, the people that
Chris Walker,
David
Rayners,
that really could do it with Tom at the helm of it, right in the middle of the scene.
You've got a Tom Simpson bowler hat, Brad.
Well, so I met the daughter came to one of my shows. Of her dad was Tom's best man at his wedding,
right?
And she gave me his bowler hat that he left, and they wanted me to.
So it's actually one of his.
It's the actual one, yeah. So that was from Tom's best man at his wedding.
And not only that, but you rode up, of course, when you rode
in 2009. I had the picture of Tom on my top tube that day, and.
You told me something about that. You told me that you get looking and thinking, well, if I know it sounds crass,
well, I was
if
in
you
a very
can
similar
die
position
here,
to what he was that day.
Yeah.
And I felt that I had Tom's spirit that day with me.
You felt there was a push.
Yeah, and I put myself in Tom's head that day.
Yeah.
Of what it must have been like for him, a man in a very similar position to me, top 10 in GC.
So you were the same age and you had two children.
Young children, you know, attempting to do what Tom was what we were all trying to do that day.
Yeah.
And it was an amazing day. It really was. And then I still remember the 2012 Tour de France. You'll remember that you gave me the sleeve
of
Tom's undershirt.
I forgot about that. Yes.
That he won the World Championships.
Yes,
I did. And I carried it around in a cellophane bag in my rucksack for 3 weeks on the 2012 Tour.
Right.
Yeah.
And you put it in your book, didn't you? Yeah. You wrote
that
in that book, Icons.
I still have it to this day.
But you didn't carry it with you while you were riding. You just
it was on the tour with me.
Yeah.
Tom, Steve.
It's like a relic, isn't it? A Catholic relic that I gave you.
It's a lovely link. It's a lovely link. Well, look, we want to get into a little bit more into your experience, Brad, on Ventoux. And coming up, we've got a few stories of how Ventoux might have changed cycling history forever when it pushed even the great Eddy Merckx to the brink. Also, why there is sometimes wisdom in launching an all-time great solo breakaway, even when you know you've got Ventoux just around the corner.
Welcome back to Cafe Aficionado. Graham Wilgoss and our guest Chris Sidwells are still with me. Our focus today, of course, is Mont Ventoux, but Ventoux's history goes well beyond Tom Simpson's death, doesn't it, Graham?
It certainly does. So it was first used in the Tour in 1951. That stage 17, was won by Louison Bobet. He didn't win the Tour that year, but he would go on to be the first man to win the yellow jersey 3 times in a row. It was later the Tour's first mountain time trial. That was stage 18 in 1958. Just a little bit of British history in there as well. Stage 7 of that particular Tour was the first one won by a Brit, Brian Robinson, a former teammate of Tom Simpson. I'm going to hit fast forward to another Brit all the way to 1994 because there's a bit that we need to come back to. But Chris Boardman, of course, wore yellow that year. And Italian Eros Poli, we saw his solo break to give himself the most almighty cushion so that he could take the climb on and beat the climbers that day. We will come back to him because his is a personal favourite. His story is a personal favourite for me, as is actually the spat that Lance Armstrong had with Marco Pantani in 2000, famously known as the gift, when Armstrong basically said in one of the press conferences afterwards that he allowed Pantani to win the stage, that I didn't need it, and that of course got right up Pantani's nose. Then there's the chaos of the crash with the race moto that brought down Chris Froome, among others, in 2016, broke his bike and saw him famously running up the climb, so that he wouldn't lose too much time until another bike could make its way to him. But we've given that we've spoken so much about Tom Simpson, rightly about Tom Simpson, whose name is. It is Mont Ventoux. It seems remiss not to revisit the 1970 Tour de France, just 3 years after Tom lost his life, because that year's Tour could have claimed a second life. And we might be talking about a very different sport today had the great Eddy Merckx not recovered from what he subsequently called the day he came closest to death on a bike.
Remarkable, yeah. Of course, he'd won 1 Tour de France up to that point, Eddie, and how different would the sport and the culture of the sport and the history of the sport look had that happened? I mean, do you know much about that event?
I do know that I've spoke to him about it, and yes, he said, I rode myself into a state of collapse, and he said there was also thinking about Tom because they'd been teammates, and he told me that Tom really helped him. He said above all else, he taught me to be brave.
He also told me, Eddie, in his own words, Tom flicked me at Paris-Nice.
He keeps saying he flicked
when Tom won Paris-Nice, they were away, weren't they, of course, on that breakaway?
Well, well, I've got my own opinions on that.
We should establish Eddy Merckx's credentials in cycling. He is the GOAT, the greatest of all time. He won the Tour in, Brad?
69, 70,
71.
71, 72. He went to the Vuelta in 73 and then won 74, of course, and came as world champion in 75 and got beat by Thévenet, didn't he?
Yeah, he did.
The Zesta Tour.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, he had such a short span, really, where he won all his tours. And in those years, how many times did he double up in the Giro, Chris? Giro Tour?
I mean, Giro Tour, he won them at least twice in the same year.
Yeah.
And of course, he was winning every monument as well. You know, 5 times Liège-Bastogne-Liège, 7 times Milan-San Remo.
But of course, that's 73. He told me in his own words that he was, up to that point when he'd won his 4th Tour, he was getting so much hatred in France for dominating the sport that he decided to leave the Tour that year and go to the Vuelta.
Yeah.
And he won the Vuelta and the Giro that year. Yeah. And obviously then he came back and won another Tour, but he didn't surpass the 5. And had he gone in his pomp in that year and won, he would have probably won 6 Tours. So it's
he probably could have won. I mean, but for that 1975, the main reason is that punch, isn't it? The punch on the Puy de Dôme. which he said to me that he had to take blood thinners because he had a massive contusion in here, and he reckons that he just didn't have any strength.
And then
after
towards
that.
the end, he broke his cheek, didn't he?
But he carried on. This is the honour of the man.
Yeah.
He carried on. He had a perfect excuse, but he carried on for two reasons. It would have negated Taverner's victory if he hadn't done.
That's true.
And he says, and his team wouldn't have got paid for second place, and he owed them that.
Yeah.
So he was given oxygen at the top, recovered, went on to win the Tour that year. But just from the shadow that 3 years prior has cast over that particular, would have cast over that particular incident at the time, what was your family's view of it at the time, Chris?
I don't know whether the rest of the family. I mean, again, I'm still. It's only 3 years later, so I'm still too young to remember what any kind of reaction was to that. I know that the Tour of France put these stage finish off until the evening, didn't they? So that it would be cooler. But it's actually probably hotter up there in the evening. If you had a baking hot day, he'd still had the wherewithal to take his cap off and throw it on Tom's monument as he went past in 1970.
There's a great picture of that.
There is a great picture, and he said to me it was like blackness. He knew that he could get. He just saw the mast on the top and just kept riding towards it, and then his peripheral vision started to go. And then he just blacked out.
Incredible.
So it's a strange place. I mean, you've raced. I've ridden up it 23 times now, and I've ridden all sorts of weather conditions. I've done the Étape de Tour on it, but not raced on it. You've raced on it. It's
a phenomenal thing to approach.
Yeah.
When you're approaching it from miles, because you can see it for miles, can't you? You can see the towers.
On approaching it for miles, then Eros Poli. Let's get into this one, because this man, 1994 Tour de France. He's not quite been given the Tour off, but he's got a very different remit because Mario Cipollini, who he would usually be the lead-out man for and domestique for, has broken his, I want to say he's broken his collarbone, broken his shoulder in the Vuelta, because that's when the Vuelta used to be ridden in the spring. And so Eros Poli has got a slightly different remit. He's looking at the Tour in a slightly different way. He's already had, up to this point, stage 15 of the 1994 Tour. He's had a couple of digs, which has surprised a lot of people, not least because he's 6'4".
Yes.
He must be 85 kgs, which is a lot to haul up a mountain, or any mountain, let alone haul up Ventoux. And that was also a particularly hard, hot, attritional tour. I mean, that stage in particular was 231 kilometres, and it was a stage to Carpentras, so it didn't finish on the Ventoux. By the time you crested the summit, you still had 42 kilometres to get back down to the finish. Nonetheless, Eros Poli makes the most incredible breakaway and goes solo. Brad, take us from there.
Well, he had something like 40 minutes lead at the start of the climb.
I think it was 26 minutes on the peloton.
Yeah. And it's by the top. What did he have at the top? 2 minutes.
He lost a minute per kilometre.
He reckoned he needed a minute per kilometre.
Yeah, it's a phenomenal ride, really.
4 minutes at
the
top.
For a 27-minute lead to lose such little time. I mean, for a rider that size, he would have. The Gruppetto would have lost more time that day, over an hour climb. And it's one of the most memorable. I mean, I was 14 watching that year. And watching him hurl down the other side into Carpentras, and the famous salute where he takes his cap off, he'd cut a hole in the top of his cap, and sort of does the whole bowing thing, and then flings it to the crowd. It was a very popular victory that day.
He was known as the bus driver in the peloton. Boardman called him the bus driver, just because he was so good at getting the Gruppetto to the fix line.
Well, he did have a heavy goods vehicle licence. Did it in Italy when he was a kid.
Is that right?
Really? No, I don't know, but it sounded good.
He was an Olympic medalist though for the team time trial.
Yeah, team time trial, world team time trial
Yeah.
champion.
Yeah.
He came from good stock.
Yeah.
A big man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So from Eros Poli, there's one other little fact I want to give you from Poli. When he originally left the group, there was an attack at the feed station, and so he wasn't able to pick up water. And so on a scorching hot day, he was completely without fluid. He all of a sudden found himself on his own. Team car was way back. Asked one of the neutral service cars whether they had any water they could give him. They didn't, but they found. So you know what it's like when you're following the tour around, and it just any can you've got in the car just becomes sort of hotter than the surface of the sun. And the neutral service car found a hot can of Fanta for him, and that was one of the things that originally spurred him on and kept him going. And he reckons if it wasn't for that, and then obviously subsequently all of the water and the Coca-Cola and everything else that he that he took on. He reckons if it wasn't for that hot can of Fanta,
Yeah.
then he wouldn't have got anywhere near.
Really?
Getting to the summit with 4 minutes on. Pantani chasing him among others, but big Mig there too.
Yeah.
So Lance Armstrong 2000. Fast forward again. Armstrong versus Pantani on Ventoux, and they're going head to head. Pantani is about 10 minutes off on the GC, but still believes that his tour is not over. It's really between Armstrong and Ulrich, this one.
Well, this was the big tour, wasn't it, where Armstrong had won in 99. Pantani hadn't been present at the tour for a couple of years. Ulrich had not been present at the tour since he's 98, missed 99, won the Vuelta. And so this was the first year that Armstrong was going to meet the supposed people that could rival him in Pantani if he ever got back to that form of 98. And Lance built quite a substantial lead in those first few mountain stages, and Pantani was way off. And I think Lance kind of felt sorry for him a little bit, or had respect for him, certainly in a certain way. And they rode most of the way up the climb, and Pantani tried a few attacks on Lance and didn't put any chinks in his armour. And there's that famous shot coming around the corner where Lance doesn't challenge him, and there's no arms thrown in the air or anything like that. And Pantani took quite offence to it, didn't he?
It became known as
the gift. Yeah,
the gift.
And it was just sort of offended his pride and made him a bit of an enemy that nearly cost Lance the tour a few years later. Was it 2005 when he kept attacking? He used it. It was Pantani wasn't going to win, but he used all his team up just to get rid of US postal riders.
Yeah. Was it a gift though?
I don't.
Well, it was.
It was, I think.
Lance was still at another gear at that point, I think.
Yeah. And the speed they went. I was on there, the mountain, and the speed they went up that mountain was just.
And from that, that was really, a punch in the face to Lance in many ways, because that's what formed the monster after that. Where no pas de cadeau, as the famous what he said. Yep. No more gifts,
no more gifts, no mercy.
The dominance really started from there with, he'll take everything, stage wins and the lot.
So more Mr. Nice Guy.
No.
Well, if ever there was one, but we'll ask him about that hopefully. Yeah. Fast forward again then to 2009, Brad, your breakthrough tour. Really, this was the tour where you really underlined the fact that you could be a proper contender, and it wasn't just fans like me and Chris at home who saw it and believed it and wanted it to happen, but it was also the rivals on the roads who really saw you as a proper threat that day.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I was an unknown at that point, I think, and there was an element of going through that tour where I shone on Verbier, and we got rid of Claude and Lance and those guys, and I couldn't stay with Contador, but I was in between with the Schlecks and Nibali, and so there was an element of unknown with me. How far can Bradley go in that third week, which is where the famous Rees Brunel said, what we're going to do to get rid of this guy. And I was in a strong team with Christian Vandervelde, who was flying in the top 10 as well. We had David Miller, David Zabriskie. We had a great team. And so I was an unknown, kind of pedigree at that time, as to how far I could go in the Tour de France with a time trial round Lac Annecy still to come.
But that was one of the last mountain tests of the tour, wasn't it? And you were.
Well, it was on the Saturday.
It was the day before the finish.
Yeah.
And you were with an all-time group. You were with the Schlecks. You were with Alberto Contador, who would go on to not lose any time that day and therefore nail the yellow jersey. With Armstrong, and you were going toe to toe with them.
Yeah, and it was an incredibly hostile climb at that. But there was a lot of Spanish supporters on the roadside that day. Of course, Contador was in yellow. People were throwing urine at certain riders, one in particular.
It was Armstrong's comeback year, wasn't it?
There was a lot of spitting, people, swearing at him and things like that. And I think he fueled off that, Lance in many ways. But it was a bit cat and mouse all the way up the climb. No one was really taking it on Saxo Road for a bit, and then it was kind of a lot of kind of cat and mousing between the Schlecks. They were firing 1-2, and as we got to Chalet Renard, that's where the climb, I'd say, really starts. I mean, it's a tough climb to Chalet Renard, but after that, when you come out the forest, the wind is more present, whichever direction it's in, and as you snake your way up the last 7 kilometres of that climb, the observatory tower becomes more in sight, and it's when you first see sight of the observatory tower that it never seems to get any closer after that. It's a long haul up to that point. And I cracked around the Tom Simpson Memorial and then got back on, got dropped again. I wasn't getting dropped as such. I was maintaining the same speed as they were attacking, and I was just not going with the attacks. But it was incredible to get to the top there and finish fourth in the Tour de France. At that point, would have done me. You know, I said in Paris that year, you know, I've equaled the great Robert Miller's fourth place and surpassed the even greater Tommy Simpson's, and that would have done me. Yeah.
So we mentioned Chalet Reynard there. I want to mention one more. 2016, Chris Froome crashing with Bauke Mollema and Richie Porte, who's riding for BMC at the time, into the back of one of the race motos, and I think another race moto might have shunted Froome from behind and broken his bike. Yeah. Mollema and Porte are able to get up and continue on up the climb, which was cut short. So it was a finish at Chalet Reynard and not a summit finish because of the wind. And Froome starts running.
Yeah, it was scenes like we'd never seen before.
No,
which is chaotic.
Chaotic. And for Froome to start running, I mean, it was genius, you know, and it shows you the kind of his mindset at that time, you know, get to the finish at all costs. Yeah. I'm in the jersey. And of course, then he didn't have the bike and there was the chaos. He took a spare bike, then he started running with the spare. But amazing. I don't think any other rider would have done that other than Chris. That shows you Chris lying on the floor, think I've got to get to the finish line, conserve this yellow jersey. But incredible scenes. They'd moved the finish anyway, hadn't they, due to the wind? But another epic memory from Mont Ventoux.
And there's one more that we should mention, actually, Wout van Aert in 2021. We were there for that one, Brad. Yeah. A double ascent of Ventoux in the Belgian champions jersey. It was a real tribute, Chris, to Eddie Merckx. In lots of ways.
Yeah, beautiful. And also, I mean, some of the most beautiful photographs I've ever seen. There's a picture of him sideways on Belgian champions jersey and the observatory in the background, the peak. It's just fantastic.
It's amazing. And a rider like Wout as well, sprinter,
so
stroke, you know, teammate, domestique, classics rider. Yeah. It was amazing. Absolutely amazing.
And for a man who really is, he's a bit of a jack of all trades, but he's a one-day racer. He's a classics man. He can be a sprinter, but for him to be that day a climber, and put everyone else to bed in the way that he did, absolutely amazing. So look, that's the nice stuff, if you like. Should we have a little bit of controversy and a feature, Chris, that we've been building in to Cafe Aficionado, because we all like a little bit of debate in the CAF, and so each week we're building our ultimate tour cyclist. We're looking for 10 vital attributes that will, if you put them all together, they will build the ultimate tour rider who will be unbeatable. Doesn't matter on what terrain you take them on, whether it's a physical attribute or a psychological attribute. So for this particular one, given your lineage and your the fact that you are the nephew of Tom Simpson, we thought we'd choose panache, Brad. Yeah. So, gentlemen, I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to fight this one out. This is not on me. This is between you two. If you could pick one rider who embodies panache, who personifies panache, and put that aspect of their overall makeup into this Frankenstein of a cyclist, this ultimate cyclist that we're building, who are you going to pick? Over to you, Chris. You're the guest. Let's give you the floor first.
I suppose I should, for family reasons, pick Tom, because he was. But I'm going to go a bit more modern. I'm going to pick Julian Alaphilippe for that.
Good shout.
Great attacking rider, rode a lot like Tom. If you look at Tom's big races, it's one attack to get to a group, another attack to thin it out, and then win the sprint. But he also would attack from different places. And the other thing about his flamboyance is that it never looked like it was secure. You know, like Tadej Pogacar goes now, and that's it, that's done. Eddie Merckx was the same. It always looked like this thing. And off the bike, that character, I cannot see a picture of Julian Alaphilippe without Plastic Bertrand music going through my mind. You know, it's just this punk image off the bike. Yeah. Great. Picture of him with the rainbow jersey, smoking a cigarette.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I've got a rider who's very similar to Julien and Tom in that respect. I'm going to go for Richard Virenque. And Richard, of course, I was instantly thinking when we were talking about Eros Poli on Mont Ventoux, that 94 Tour where Virenque was always in the King of the Mountains jersey. I think he won it 6 times. Challenging for a podium. He was second in the Tour once, third in the Tour. The year Casatelli died in 95, Richard Virenque won that stage. And I can still remember in my mind watching Eurosport and Virenque coming up in the polka dot jersey, unbeknownst to him that Casatelli had died that day. and winning the race. But and then of course getting thrown off the race in '98 for the whole Festina affair. But Viron, incredibly charismatic rider, charismatic personality off the bike, quite controversial in many ways, but always a joy to watch.
Yeah.
Always a joy. I think. Oh, Chris, go on. Are you going to counter that? Are you having that?
No, I want to just the flamboyance that Alaphilippe's worked everywhere. It worked in single day races as well, on World Championships.
Yeah, true. Viron only really did the Tour.
Bit of a tour
in the Tour on the climbs for Viron.
Yeah.
I think for partly for that reason, and partly because, as you say, Julian Alaphilippe would know that he was going to blow up, but it was just a suicide mission every time. But he would just do it anyway. And if I get to the finish with as much swagger and gusto and energy as I possibly can, then great. And if I don't, it doesn't matter. I'm just going to.
The other one I could have gone for was Claudio Chiappucci from that era.
Yeah.
Another one, but there's so many.
I thought Frank van den Broek might get a mention too.
Yeah, Frank wasn't really someone. Frank was just pure class and talent, but he wouldn't say he had the same panache, and he was just Frank was just a genius. With a very, very vulnerable, fragile mind.
Well, look, it goes to.
We could be here all day.
I get to be the adjudicator here. So we're going to put Julian Alaphilippe.
Yeah. No, I'll go with that.
in for the panache. You can check out our Frankenstein's champion of a cyclist as we build it, or as we continue to build it, on our Instagram page at Sir Brad's Cafe. And you can tell us if you agree. Tell us we were right to choose Julian Alaphilippe for panache, the greatest proponent of panache this time round.
Chris, we can't have you here without a mention of your work around cycling, which is absolutely massive. One of your books, A Race for Madmen, a history of the Tour de France, so away from Mont Ventoux. Can you give us a couple of stories from your other favourite Tour stories?
Right, I'm going to give a Barry story, because Barry's always telling his stories.
Barry Hoban.
And it's a sort of a window on Eddie Merckx's character. Barry was, one year he was like 6th or 7th in the prologue, and there was like 6 flat stages and then the Pyrenees. And he thought it was only like 36 seconds behind Eddie Merckx, and he thought, I can get the yellow jersey here, because there's intermediate sprints with 3 seconds, 2 seconds, 1 second. So as there's 6 seconds a day. So he said, I'm going to do it. I'm going to go for the yellow jersey. So he says, my race was that first sprint. Got it. Got the team to lead me out. Got the 3 seconds. Great. I've got 3 seconds. Look round. Who's second? Eddie Merckx. So I haven't got 3 seconds. I've got 1 second. Second sprint, same thing. Eddie Merckx is second. It went on for 3 days. I'd only got 9 seconds back and only got 1 day left. And I said to Eddie, what are you trying to do? I just want to wear the yellow jersey for 1 day. I'll be half an hour behind you in the Pyrenees. And he says, Barry, it's the yellow jersey and it's mine. And that just sort of, I think, gives it a thing. It sort of sums up Eddie.
That's why he was the cannibal.
Yeah. And the other one is just shows how deep. You're talking about Eros Poli there, and they found a boiling hot can of Fanta or whatever just to keep him going, and that's where you get to in the tour. Is an Alan Piper story. Alan was riding for Panasonic, and he'd worked hard to get in the team, and you know what it was like. Panasonic, Peter Post shouting at everybody. Bullied Alan, because Alan's got it a little bit spiritual and was into vegetarianism and everything. Bullied him, something chronic, but he loved riding for that team. Got into the tour team. He's working on the flat for Eddie Plankett. He's leading out Eric van der Raden. He's working for Phil Anderson. He's working for Pippi York in mountains as much as he can. Says the last but one mountain stage, I was dead. I was dropped on the first climb. Just pedal over pedal to get to the finish. I got to the finish and there's 22 seconds inside the time limit, so I had to do it again. I said, I got to my room and I just couldn't. I started crying, uncontrollably crying. I pulled the duvet and I wouldn't come out. And then my roommate said, well, I've got to go and fetch Peter. And he thought, I'm just going to get killed here, but I can't get out. I collapsed. He says, and Post came into the room and he thought, he's just going to give me he said, but I couldn't stop. I just literally couldn't stop crying. And he says, he sat by my bed, this hard man, and he just rubbed my back and said, it'll be all right.
Yeah.
It'll be all right. He said, and when I eventually came out, he says, I can't go on. He says, I know you can't. You've given everything. You can leave the tour with your head held. So he was kind, but you had to nearly kill yourself to find it.
Yeah.
But those are my two other
Great
little stories.
Yeah. I'm sure you could go on all day.
Yeah, I can go on all day, yes. And frequently do. Come to my talks.
Yeah,
I do go on all night.
So, Chris, what keeps you in love with cycling?
I don't know. I sometimes ask myself that question.
No.
Because, I mean, it arguably it killed somebody I'd really have liked to know. But you just can't help who you fall in love with, can you?
No.
It's the same in life.
And seeing as we're on this sort of cafe aficionado theme, what's your favourite cycling cafe?
I'm going to get lynched in Yorkshire, but I'm going to go for the Revolution Cafe in the Cotswolds. It's gorgeous, and it's just a fantastic place. The Revolution is in Morton-le-Marsh in the North Cotswolds.
And what's your order?
It's got to be chocolate. It's a waste of time having anything that's not a dessert that's not chocolate, right?
Debatable.
Pleasingly straight to the point, though. Pleasingly Yorkshire, that. A Yorkshire
chocolate.
order in the Cotswolds.
It's chocolate. Whatever it is, give me chocolate.
Yeah, love it. Well, Chris, from us both, thank you so much.
Thank you, Chris.
It's been wonderful.
Pleasure as
a great
always.
Experience.
Yeah.
Real pleasure to have you on Cafe Aficionado. And remember, if you are enjoying the pod, then please do hit follow wherever you get your podcasts. Watch us on YouTube and join us on all the usual social media platforms. Also, Brad, at Brad's Cafe.
Yes.
And we'd love you to tell us your favourite cycling cafe while we're here, wouldn't we? So tell us your order, tell us your caf, in the same way that Chris has done. Whether it's at the start, whether it's the end of a long ride,
That's it.
And let us know wherever you follow us.
Yep.
Reckon that's it from me, Brad. I'm off for a flat white.
Yep, Graham, thank you for joining me as always, and thank you for joining us at Cafe Aficionado. See you next time for another ride.